welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Paul, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm not going to act like we didn't just talk for like 25 minutes off air, but Paul, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone out there listening?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be with you, Robbie. So Paul Abbott is my name. I live in Western Australia. I've been very fascinated by the case of the assassination of President Kennedy since I was 11. Reading books, it's not something that you get to talk about too much here in Australia, but it's certainly one of those cases that, because it's still an unsolved mystery and there are so many aspects to it, I've been fascinated by it. So really, where I've come to in the last couple of years is finding an opportunity to kind of give back or contribute to the research community. For me, that represented doing a bit of a project called the Garrison Files Index. Basically, I got access to the remaining or surviving folders of Jim Garrison, the district attorney that the film JFK follows. He was and still is the only person to have brought anyone to or the case to a trial to prosecute. And I think most of us know how that ended. But for me, Garrison still, I always got there was a bit of controversy. You heard about him, giving sodium pentothal to witnesses, and there were allegations of corruption and him ignoring the mafia angle in terms of the whole New Orleans, the summer of 1963. And Lee Harvey Oswald, of course. So for me, what I did was I got the folders because I was just interested in seeing what was in them, and they were just in not really a very good order. So I just set about literally scanning through each page, looking for names, and I just inputted them onto a giant spreadsheet, and I just kept doing that for 18 months. And it's out there now. It was always meant to just be something to help anyone that was interested in not just Garrison, but more so what he was looking into. And for me, what was very, very clear was all the different angles, all the different leads he really looked into. And even after, going into the 70s and pretty much to the end of his life, he never stopped looking. So we owe that to him. But what I wanted to do was go, okay, well, if Garrison is such a controversial figure to some people, well, let's see what he had. So I wanted to organise as much of the available documents of his that remain, and they're there for anyone to access. I think you can download them from the archive library. The American, I'm not sure what it stands for.
AARC.
That's right, yeah. So they're public documents. I got mine from Leno Sanik at Black Op Radio, and tic-tacked with him and people like Paul Blow, who has done some very good work on Oswald in New Orleans and with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. So a resource for anyone of all different knowledge levels and beliefs. Whatever you think about Garrison, he collected a lot of stuff, and not just about the Kennedy assassination either. There was a lot about all kinds of things to do with, like the Bilderberg group. We got into the RFK assassination, Martin Luther King. Because as we probably a lot of us and a lot of your followers would understand, a lot of these things are connected. Or potentially anyway. So, yeah, a fascinating exercise for me. But probably the thing that lingered or stuck with me the most during that project was the topic of Lee Harvey Oswald's shooting. Oswald being the alleged assassin of President Kennedy. In the Garrison folders, there was a solitary folder that was basically the name of the Dallas police investigation into Oswald's shooting. Funnily or interestingly enough, I think it's titled something completely to do with security. So, the security preparations for Lee Oswald's transfer. So to me, I thought, okay, that's interesting. Even in the title, they're trying to, really put upon the put this idea out there that security was all sorted for Oswald's transfer. But as we know, as history has told us, security certainly did not work that day, and he was shot and killed in defenseless, handcuffed in Dallas police custody. And the documents that I read, that I found in the Garrison collection, just showed me that it was such a tokenistic investigation to begin with, and I just saw so many contradictions amongst witness statements that I basically just kept pulling on the thread, and here I am now. Over a year later, I've done a lot more research on it.
I'm probably in the same area as you with the Oswald shooting because I've been looking at the media reporting and just trying to track who was where. And there's a lot of people that were involved in that small basement, surprisingly. But just a weird kind of upfront question. When Oswald has his hands like this and he's showing his handcuffs, people keep saying that he's putting up a power fist as like a sign of rebellious behavior. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's what you do when your hands are handcuffed and you're just trying to show people that, like, hey, look, it's police brutality, which matches some of the statements he had when he was arrested.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure exactly when that photo was taken, but I gathered it was on his way to the midnight press conference on I think the stroke of midnight, Friday November the 22nd, and the Saturday. But yeah, no, it's a good point. He was handcuffed right the way through that weekend, and obviously when he was shot by Ruby.
Do you believe the documentations reflect the Dallas Police Department, their protection of Oswald or the security of Oswald based on the photos that we have? Because it seems like the photos, they're very lackadaisical in their security measures. But then based on their documentation, it all reflects that they were trying their absolute best to make sure that I tried to reach Jesse Curry, but his phone wasn't ringing. So I sent an officer to his house. And I was like, all right, okay, guys.
Yeah, that's definitely what it smacks of. And they do, they call it, they called it in their report, their kind of summary of their investigation, that they put all these things in place, but unfortunately they couldn't possibly account for any kind of coincidence that they made out to have happened by Ruby just somehow being able to come down the Main Street ramp and be perfectly in place, with under a minute before Oswald came into place. They basically fob it off as we did everything we could. Coincidence played its hand, and that's as I've found, and as I'm very, very determined to get out there, and I know others have done work on this. That's not the case. There's absolutely more to it, and my thing now is absolutely conveying how much of a topic, how much of a worthy topic the shooting of Oswald is, in terms of its own sensible research. Whether you think he was guilty of, to any degree in regards to Kennedy's killing or even that of Officer Tippett, it's kind of almost by the by. He still ought to have had the presumption of innocence, just like anybody, and had the right to protection, and he didn't have that. So to me, that's that's kind of the most fundamental thing to it all.
What were you able to expose about the Oswald shooting that obviously were some red flags, whether in security protocols or just whether it was not normal circumstances when it comes to probably what the historical record teaches? And did you start just with the shooting, or did you focus on that weekend? Because there's flaws ever since they brought him into the Dallas Police Department.
I was I really early on when I started to put some research together, I kind of found myself Bart Camp's book, Prayer Man More Than the Fuzzy Picture. That does a really, really good job of chronicling Oswald's time in custody. So I kind of, not directly, but I feel like I literally kind of picked up the area of focus from his coverage of Oswald's time in custody. I really, what I'm doing with this work is I'm wanting to focus as much as possible on just the Oswald shooting. So I'm not too interested in the fact that his in this context that his interrogations weren't recorded. We know that's a travesty, and we know that that's absolutely suspicious. but to me, I'm not thinking about this. I'm thinking about all of the moving parts and all the lack of communication and the threats that came in and the security that was apparently put in place but clearly wasn't. I'm really getting right down to the minutiae of who was standing where and who says one thing but contradicts someone else who was meant to be right nearby. And there are so many so many just funny and odd, unexplained, or maybe there is something more sinister to it all that I'm really focusing on. But
Do you know how many
yeah,
attempts were threatened for Oswald's life? Because I've only found, I know there's Vernon Glossop, and then there's, I think, Billy Grammer, who talked about Jack Ruby, he recognized as the voice. But then there's also conflicting statements with like Captain W.B. Frazier, who stated, apparently in his Warren Commission interview, that, yeah, there were threats, maybe potentially couldn't be so sure. And then in his later FBI interview, like on this, what was it? The 25th of November, he states,
yeah,
I couldn't recall that I ever made that statement. And I'm like, hold
yep.
on a second.
So that's where I really dig down into, because to me, what I wanted to know was, okay, what were the conditions? We know that Dallas City Hall was absolutely teeming with press. We know that up until Saturday morning, so maybe even the rest of Saturday day. But what about the threats? What did Dallas police do, and just how legitimate were those threats? And I've been able to find out quite a little bit more about that aspect. So one of the things that I draw a very big question mark over is the FBI in terms of the threats, because what the word of the threats came through the FBI. So there was no one that rang up and that I can find that spoke directly to Captain Fraser. If these threat makers were so concerned about wanting to warn the authorities, particularly Dallas police, that they were going to launch an attack on Oswald, well, why didn't they call the Dallas police directly? Well, I'll come back to the grammar side of things in a minute, but the threats seem to have only come through the FBI. So there's Glossop, and there's also another FBI agent whose name escapes me right now, but no one called the sheriff's department directly. Oh, sorry, they did, but they were saying that the details were the exacts. There was like the same person was reading two different scripts. So that aside, I think the FBI, it's they were the ones that controlled that aspect in terms of the investigation into that part of it. The person that conveyed the threats was also the person that took the statements down from the sheriff's deputy McCoy, who apparently had received word of threats to Oswald's life. But if I can just jump over to the grammar side of things, he's an interesting one because the times that he received the threats vary, from Saturday night to very, very early Sunday morning. Now, I know, that can be down to a person's memory, but he didn't. Apparently, he caught up with Jack Ruby on the Saturday, but didn't only recognised his voice later after the fact with Oswald shooting. There was nobody else around when the threat came in. Apparently he did tell his supervisor Putnam, but Putnam never testified to that. He wrote out an affidavit, but there was no trace of that affidavit. Apparently it got lost. And of course, Ruby probably wouldn't have admitted to being the threat maker, because that would have shown premeditation. But there's just so many inconsistencies with Grammer's call. I just wonder if it actually ever happened. To be honest, it's a bit of a rabbit hole that I'm not sure how legitimate the threats are, because there's clear attempts between the Sheriff's Department and Fraser, the Dallas Police Department, to act on these threats that have come in by way of the FBI and then a person on behalf of the committee that rang into the Sheriff's Department. But again, no one called the Dallas Police Department if we take Grammer's account out of it. So it's just that in itself is a real quagmire, which, yeah, I obviously continue to have doubts about.
Do you believe that led to the change in the procedures of how they were going to transfer Oswald? Because obviously Jesse Curry published when they were going to transfer. And I think even in the documentation it says in reliance or in compliance to the press and the news media relationship that they had. That's why Jesse Curry did that. And obviously there was a lot of caution and threats started coming up later. I do believe threats came in. I've heard that it's been multiple threats, but it seems like everyone states the same exact thing. So if it is a script, that's a good perspective for sure.
Yeah.
Or it's the same call and everyone's just remembering it. So
yeah, well, there were no doubt random phone calls. I mean, the sheriff, McCoy, he testified to having all kinds of phone calls come into the Sheriff's Department. Across that Saturday night, he had people giving commiserations, people just from all over the country just ringing in and giving their thoughts on the way Oswald should be treated, and all sorts. So, but then there are anecdotally reports of other threats that came in. But what we're talking about in the apostrophes are of the committee of 100 people who said that they would attack the transfer of Oswald, and that's the other thing that it makes me very suspicious about Grammer. He somehow was able to know about the how Oswald's transfer would take place when it hadn't even been discussed between Curry, Fritz, or Sheriff Bill Decker before Sunday morning. So how on earth was Billy Grammer supposed to supposed to have, or a person that was making the threat, supposed to have actually known that Oswald would be transferred in a convoy using an armoured car, all of that. To me, Grammer sounds like, in that particular aspect, there was something that was manufactured after the fact, I think, to lump premeditation on Jack Ruby.
Now, how do you assume Jack Ruby got into the basement?
So, firstly, we need to probably acknowledge the official version, and then when I say the official version, that's down to the Dallas Police Department and even the Warren Commission. It was said that he transferred some money to one of his stripper employees at the nearby Western Union, on the same block as City Hall, only a couple of 100 feet. So very, very close by, and on the same stretch of Main Street. He walked along and was able to amble down into the basement from Main Street, past Officer Roy Vaughan, who was letting out a car that was coming up from the basement to get around to the front of the convoy to take Oswald to county jail. That was the official version. He was able to get down the ramp and be in place in under a minute before Oswald emerged. The only way I think Ruby could have gotten into the basement was actually through the annex building. And the annex building is, I don't know if you know the layout of the municipal precinct in Dallas, but you have the old Dallas City Hall, which is five floors high, and built next to it 40 years later in 1954 was the annex building. That was built because City Hall was getting too small to accommodate courts, Dallas police and the jail. So this annex building sits right next to City Hall, and it is connected. There are walkways between the two buildings. They're basically joined. And the annex building sits over the basement car park, and the basement is obviously where Oswald was shot. Now, I think Ruby had a door left unlocked for him, which went through a very, very short alleyway to an internal fire escape staircase. And using that walking across that staircase, you're able to access the back of a service elevator. There's a hatch which anyone, a utility worker at the time, people could get easy access in and out of the building if they were for doing works. So I think Ruby was able to come in through this outer door, along the alleyway, through the service elevator, out into one of the corridors on the ground floor of the annex building, and come down the stairway, the stairwell to the basement. Now, the door down there was an emergency exit, so it couldn't be locked from the inside of the basement. It could only ever be left unlocked because it was an emergency exit for people that might need to flee from upstairs. So that door couldn't be locked. And I think Ruby simply was able to come down the stairs and walk from the eastern side of the basement, the car park, and literally across behind where all the the media and the crowd of Dallas police were standing, looking in the looking. They had their backs to him, and he was able just to get into place. He might have been ushered in place by a Confederate, waiting for him. I have a pretty good idea of who that is. Reserve Officer Kenneth Croy. That's not an exclusive. A lot of people think that. And he was the uniformed police officer that was standing behind Ruby. You might have seen photos of, just before, or footage just before Oswald comes out, of Ruby standing there with the fedora.
Which, thank God, there's a lot of reporters down there, because those photos are fascinating to look at. You literally have the before, when Ruby leaps out of the crowd, and then you have the after, and then you have during the shooting as well, too.
Absolutely. But it's amazing how, and this is what I'm very clear on, is how little people were willing to testify that they saw. And that, on the face of it, sounds suspicious, but you've seen the footage. It's very quick. And it was done in such a way that a lot of, obviously, the people behind, Oswald could not have seen anything happen because the lights, the cameras were so bright. And Ruby literally lunged out. He was hunched down, as you can see in the footage and the photographs. It happened like that. So, for the amount of people that were around, and I calculate there to be around 90 people in the immediate, in the Dallas basement. A lot of people didn't see all that much.
Yeah, that's the funny part, is that there's the conspiracy that it wasn't Ruby that shot Oswald. I'm sure you must have seen that in the research thing. The only reason that can stem from is from, if you read those testimonies of the WBAP reporters, the WDAMT reporters, whatever you want to say, whoever, K-Box, they all state that they weren't sure that they saw Ruby shoot Oswald, but they were informed later. And I was like, well, you got to understand, half these people are paying attention to the way their camera is positioned and making sure that their camera is getting the footage. So their eyes aren't necessarily even on the event while it's happening. They're making sure their filming is capturing it, and they'll review it later. So that's where I can see the weight for people to say, oh, that's how we know it's not Jack. I do believe it's Jack Ruby 100%. But obviously, when you're trying to discuss any event of the assassination, everything's controversial with 1,000 different perspectives on it.
That's right. And look, there is, I'd be lying if I said I didn't come across that kind of research of people saying that it wasn't Ruby, it was a double. And some people make the very good point that the hairline of Ruby's neck under the fedora doesn't is very thick and straight compared to Ruby's layered thinning neckline. People have made that observation. I'm leaving that till later on. What I'm working on now is giving people. I think there are other things we need to get past, or at least for people to understand, about how much of a setup Oswald's shooting was. I think going back to the shooting in Dealey Plaza, I think Oswald was marked for death the moment President Kennedy's limousine was rushed out of Dealey Plaza. We can go into that aspect as well, but he was more dangerous to anyone that set him up or that he worked for, who he was informing for, who he was informing on, whatever guys Oswald had. He was only ever dangerous from that moment. So the die was set. He needed to be eliminated, and um, it's reasonable to suspect that maybe Ruby was stalking Oswald throughout that weekend in City Hall. He admitted to the FBI that he had his loaded revolver on his person when he was present for Oswald's press conference. Apparently he was in only a few feet of Oswald when Oswald was brought in. I can't see Ruby in any of in that particular vicinity of the press conference room, but he was no doubt there. And was he there to stalk Oswald and try and get into Captain Fritz's office and do something crazy, and use the defense of passion? All I know is that there is so much more to it than has met our eye. Yeah.
I think I've read a statement from an officer or a reporter, you might have come across this, but on the third floor where Oswald was being held, that Ruby tried to walk through the door and an officer stopped him and said, "You don't have permission to go in here," and turned him around and he went the other way. And apparently Ruby got on a phone call with his sister. And started talking to her after that, where I was like, man, he's walking in there. Like, the thing is, every part of this assassination, depending on where you differ on certain testimonies or certain statements, you're going to have a different conclusion or perspective. If you believe Jack Ruby was at Parkland Hospital with Seth Kanter, which I do believe that Seth Kanter saw him there, you can say that he was just a nosy person and wanted to be involved in everything that was going on in Dallas. But then you examine him around the Dallas police basement and the department that whole weekend. Well, he's going and trying to get into a door to try and get behind the scenes, which makes you wonder, obviously there's a pre-existing relationship with the Dallas police, but why is he doing it so comfortably? And that's where, even for me, I mean, you mentioned the annex building. A lot of people believe that he was let in through a side door based on his police connections. But do you know exactly when the shooting took place? Like what time?
It was 11:21, 11:21, and we have there's thankfully we have the timestamp, I guess, of the receipt that he got when he made that transfer at the Western Union. The time that he was stamped on there, that he had stamped, was 11:17, and so he completed the transaction, took his receipt, and walked out. And according to Doyle Lane, who was the supervisor who attended to Ruby, he just walked out as normal. He seemed perfectly composed. He recognised Ruby from previous times he transferred money. It was obviously before the internet. It was a very common thing to do. And from there, it was a very, very brief walk. Even if, and there is timings in the Dallas police investigation, they measure it by feet and time, the route that Ruby would have taken to walk down Main Street and then the ramp. So the way that I propose and others do, and cannot really only be the way that he accessed, was through that side door in the annex building, down through the elevator, down the unlocked stairwell door, and your connections, his connections to DPD, his time in and out of the annex building, City Hall, I'm sure it all would have been very familiar to him. So the timing fits. The shooting happened at 11:21. Ruby had 4 minutes to cover a journey of 300 feet if we want to factor in corners and things like that. It was no problem. And I think what a lot of researchers fall into the trap of thinking is that, well, how could he have still been there perfectly on time to be there for when Oswald was brought out? If you have a look on Google Maps, and again, other research, the research has been done on this by others as well. Even to this day, the layout, where the Western Union office was, the vacant lot between the building where the Western Union was in and then the annex building, that's still there. and you can see the windows of the annex building look very clearly to where Ruby would have emerged from when he came out of the Western Union. I don't think it's a stretch of any imagination to think that someone was simply up looking out for Ruby as he came out of the Western Union office, and saw that he was making the way that he needed to, and was able to walk back through the annex building to the third floor and give some kind of signal to say, "He's here. Let's move Oswald out." I don't think that's too much of a stretch.
Now, based on the WBAP reporters that were outside the Dallas police basement, they stated that Ruby was there at 8. They spotted him at 8. And apparently he went up to one of their cars and talked to one of their guys twice about when the... So that's for me. I mean, I don't know if you trust that, but for me, I'm like, that's not, spur of a moment decision to go shoot Oswald after transferring some money. He's obviously very interested in when this transfer is going down, which means that it is definitely premeditated, at least for me.
Yeah. Yeah, so those testimonies are interesting, and what I'll do is I'll take it back 24 hours. That news truck, the WBAP TV news truck, was there pretty much the whole weekend, and there's testimony from someone called Fred Reinstein, who was a producer. He was one of the TV producers, and he remembered identifying Ruby as only after the fact. He didn't know him to be Ruby at the time. But he recalled someone that he later identified as Ruby coming in and out of that truck, helping himself to a chicken lunch that they'd been supplied to the...
Apparently helping out with some of the camera equipment as well, too.
Apparently, yep. And, they came to refer to him as their creepy friend. And the interesting... What Reinstein said was very interesting. He said they actually recognised their creepy friend in one of their monitors from a live feed up on the third floor. And they actually said they saw Ruby go into the outer office of Henry Wade's office and didn't come back out. So it's not like he was ejected or turned away. He walked in there like he was part of the furniture and didn't come out. So make of that what you will. Was that Ruby? Who knows? But getting back to the 8 o'clock sightings of Ruby outside City Hall, that's interesting because the three sound technicians and producers, I think another was a floor director, or I'm not sure, but their names were Ritchie, Walker, and Smith, and they gave some differing accounts between them. But the one thing that makes me question it might sound small and insignificant, was descriptions of the man that they thought, again, identified after the fact as Ruby, because they didn't know Jack Ruby apparently, was that the man that they that ducked his head in and would ask every now and then if Oswald had been brought down was wearing very crumpled clothing, like he'd slept in his, like he basically slept in the suit he was wearing. Now, Jack Ruby was meticulous with his appearance. That is very well known. And again, if we want to think about the footage and the photographs, the person that shot Oswald was not wearing a crumpled suit. So, okay, there's a few hours that have passed between, when he maybe could have gone and changed clothes or something like that. But the descriptions of the man versus descriptions of other accounts of where Ruby was at the time by people that did know him, like his roommate George Senator, who himself is pretty suspicious. I don't know. I tend to think that Ruby actually was at home and did get out of bed. I think he answered his cleaner calling at about 8 o'clock or 8:30 that morning, gruffly answering, yes, come around. Why are you calling? I'm not sure why you're calling. When apparently it was their arrangement that she would call to make sure he still wanted her to come around to clean. George Senator said that Ruby came out and was eating scrambled eggs for breakfast, reading the paper. He seemed to be acting relatively normal. Senator was coming in and out of their apartment, doing his laundry. He recalled the phone call that Ruby got from his employee, stripper Karen Carlin, asking for money. You could look at it either way. I understand that, and how Ruby came to be in the vicinity to be in place to shoot Oswald. Yeah, it's obviously one of the still, I guess, unanswered and mysterious aspects, or one of the polarizing aspects to it. If Ruby didn't have money to transfer, I'm sure that there would have been some other reason, or he would have just been straight out ordered to, right, the time's getting on. You need to do this now. I bring about the case of another Dallas police officer that was acting very, very suspiciously that morning. He could not be far away from public payphones all morning. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, William J. Blackie Harrison. He was the big tall guy that was standing in front of Ruby with the cigar.
I know Greg mentions him a few times.
Yeah.
Parker.
Yeah. So Harrison, his reports have him, testimonies have him coming into work at about 8 o'clock that Sunday morning, as normal. And as was the case, him and any other colleague would go out and grab a coffee from a nearby diner. So on this particular morning, he and Lewis Miller, Detective Lewis Miller, who was in the same division, the Juvenile Bureau, left City Hall to go and get a coffee from a place just a little bit back further on Commerce Street, virtually around the corner from City Hall, called the Deluxe Diner. When they were both at the diner, Harrison was on the phone, on the payphone. Now, he put it down to being called back, to come back to City Hall. They were getting ready to transfer Oswald. It needed to be all hands on deck. And Miller, eventually, it had to be prized out of him. He would say, yes, that Harrison was on the phone. I assumed it was because it was the police calling us back, someone back at the office calling us back. So that's one thing. But then Harrison, he doesn't go back to his desk for the rest of the morning. He said he did, but his colleagues up on the third floor, in the office where the Juvenile Bureau was based, they didn't see him. So I have a very, very strong suspicion that Harrison actually went down to what they called the locker room. So it was the sub-basement level of City Hall. Have you heard of the sub-basement?
I've probably seen photos of it, but I've seen so many photos of the basement where I'm like, damn, I need to go there and just check it out, because I'm getting confused.
Yeah. You're closer than me, so please go and do it. So you've got the basement, and then there's the sub-basement level. Sub-basement level under the car park near where Oswald was shot. There was the sub-basement was used for, they called it the engine room. It was where a lot of the machinery, air conditioning system, the pipes and things were controlled out of for the City Hall building. At that same level was the locker room. And you remember the press conference for Lee Oswald? That was held in the sub-basement level of City Hall as well. You can't find any floor plans anywhere of subterranean City Hall in 1963. You cannot find them. But anyway, this locker room was actually accessible from street level, because it was a locker room. Police would come and go at all times. So I think that Blackie Harrison, when he was coming back from the diner, said he peeled away from his colleague Miller. Whatever Miller did, I'm not sure. He's suspicious in his own right, and I'll get to him in a minute. I think Harrison went down to the locker room. There was no one down there, but there was a bank of payphones. So he had the locker room all to himself, and he had access to these payphones. Now, I think he was the guy that was either in contact with Ruby directly, or maybe some kind of benefactor. He might have been the person that Ruby was talking to back at his apartment, in this instance I was talking about earlier. Very suspicious. There were. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but I'm coming to the point. There were utility workers that were asked to leave the basement. Do you know about them?
If you want to explain, just for anyone out there.
Yeah. So A group of about 7 utility workers, so porters, people that would park the police cars that came into the basement garage, made sure that members of the public didn't try and get free parking, all of that kind of stuff. They maintained the car park. There were also janitors or engineers amongst this crowd. Now, they were standing over in the eastern end of the car park, which is where I speculate that Ruby entered from. They were standing watching all of the comings and goings, as the press were starting to set their cameras up at around 9 o'clock that Sunday morning. And when the search of the basement had gotten underway, one of the police officers was actually a reserve officer by the name of Alvis Brock, came over and asked them to move out. They needed to secure the basement, nothing to see here, go about your way. So all of these workers did leave. They hardly would have been a security threat. If they stayed where they would have been far out of anybody's way. No cameras, if they were worried about appearances or anything like that, no cameras would have seen them because they were right at the back, behind the backs of everybody looking at Oswald as he would have been coming out. But anyway, these workers were asked to leave. Now, 2 of them went on a bit of a journey. They wanted to watch the transfer on a TV. They wanted to still see the Oswald transfer take place. So what they did was they went up. They all were asked to leave and go up into the annex building. Now, these 2 workers peeled away from the other group, and they actually went out through the service elevator, the hatch that I was talking about, over the fire escape stairs and out of the alleyway and the door that I think that Ruby came out of. They actually used the door that to exit the building. They locked it behind them, as their testimony suggests. What they did was they then walked all the way around the Dallas City Hall, so the front of the annex building. They walked past Roy Vaughan, who was taking guard at the top of Main Street ramp. They stopped to look down the ramp and see what they could see. Vaughan corroborates them being there. They keep on walking around to the Harwood side of the old City Hall building. And they know that there's a TV in the locker room. So they enter the Harwood Street entrance, and they're able to get all the way down to the sub-basement locker room where they know that there's a TV to be. Now, remember, I contended that Harrison was down there and being close to the bank of payphones. Both of these porters testified to a man down there that they vaguely identified as either a clerk from one of the jail offices or maybe one of the, I think, I'm going to get it wrong. I think they very vaguely referred to him as a jail officer. This man told them that they need not hang around in the locker room. They're not going to show the Oswald's transfer is not going to be broadcast live on TV anyway. You might as well go. So one of the guys buys a can of chili from a vending machine down there, and then they leave.
I love the specific. I love it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. But,
I didn't know you can get a can of chili out of a vending machine. That's wild. Absolutely.
But it's frustrating because that's, so in itself, that's a bit of an interesting tangent, but that's just another example of the Warren Commission not doing enough to really probe to find out who this man was. No other questions. No one is asked, what were you doing down the locker room? Blackie Harrison did admit to being down in the locker room, but he made it out in his testimony that it was only momentarily to get some cigars, obviously one of the ones that he would be smoking at the time of Oswald's shooting. But remember I said that some of his colleagues just said that they didn't see him for that morning. I think it was Jay Cutshaw, one of the detectives in the Juvenile Bureau, said to Blackie Harrison when he was coming up from the direction of the way that you would come up from the locker room, where have you been? It's like it was the first time he'd seen him that morning. So there's many kind of scenarios like that that are just all these little stories, all these little happenings and goings. Do they mean something? Do they not? That's the puzzle that it turns out that we're faced with.
If you believe that it wasn't Ruby on the street at 8 a.m., you believe he was at his apartment, when do you think he was contacted to carry out this mission of silencing Oswald? Because obviously there's some statements he says after his arrest that I find pretty interesting. One when he was brought to, I think it was the fifth floor or the fourth floor after his, yeah, fifth floor after his arrest. He stated something along the lines of, they asked him, why did you do it? And he says, because you guys couldn't. And it was like, it's not that you guys wouldn't, which is what you would normally say, because if they're officers, everybody wants Oswald dead based on all the threats and people in the crowd screaming at him because he's getting accused of being killed the assassin, which on the testimony of Charles T. Walker for the HSCA, when he talks about pulling Oswald out of that theater and putting a hat over his face to make sure that obviously the crowd wouldn't have this volatile reaction, people were shouting at Oswald, calling him JFK's assassin. But Charles T. Walker was like, the crowd was more sure than we were. I was sure that he killed Tippit, but was not sure about, I don't know why they were associating him with killing the president. So I'm like, that's very interesting because that's not how the normal story goes. But on the fifth floor, when he says that you guys couldn't, Ruby says that to the officers. That seems like he was hired to go carry this out because obviously Dallas police can't just shoot him in custody or something like that. I mean, they could do what they did with the carousel girl and she hung herself with her own jeans. I'm like, damn, what a creative.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I think he was enlisted to do it. I do. He's obviously his connections to organised crime, I think, would have played a big part in his being selected to do it. What better than to use the potential angle of the mafia did silenced Oswald. It was a typical mafia hit. It was a surprise sneak attack, a gut shot, literally. So I think that being his extensive background, going back to his young years in Chicago, being tied to organised crime, that being part of his legend, I think that made him a very good candidate right there. But Ruby had many connections with Dallas police, and some do admit to being friends with, having friendship with Ruby and for quite a few years. Blackie Harrison, the cigar cop that I was talking about, he was friends with Ruby for 11 years. Sergeant Dean, who I don't know if you've heard of him, but he is incredibly suspicious as being the person to make sure that the basement was basically set for Ruby to enter and do what he needed to do. So whether Ruby was paid a whole heap of money to do it, he was in hock. Apparently, he had a great load of debt to deal with. I've just heard recently, and I don't know how true this is. I haven't fact checked it, but apparently he didn't own the Carousel Club. Apparently he was just the front man for the New Orleans mob. So
I haven't heard that, but I know that he took advantage of it. His sister allegedly owned that club originally, but then there's also accounts of him running the Silver Spur, which it is the Silver Spur. There's been multiple documentation that has kind of been, it's weird when you read these FBI reports, they spell people's names wrong. They do a bunch of things wrong. Yeah, it's surprising. But the Silver Spur, I mean, apparently he had another sister. I didn't know she was a bartender at the Silver Spur, based on certain accounts of his time there. Apparently this person was his sister. I'm forgetting her name right now. I know it starts with an R. I think it's Rose or something like that. But I only know about Eva. And I think she's the one that testified and everything like that. But there's obviously a lot about this case that there's just, you can try and connect the lines, but if you're just going by the documentation, none of the documentation is 100% complete. It's all like 50 or 25%.
All we can do is, when the words aren't there, we can look at people's actions. And I think that's, we can take a fair bit out of that in this case. Just if we can get back to Ruby and how he was enlisted to shoot Oswald. Apparently, on the afternoon of the assassination, he had $7,000 in cash on him, and he was standing in the line at the merchant bank. He was told off for carrying $7,000 in 1963. That's nuts. Could that have been his payment in advance for his assignment that weekend of shooting Oswald? But, who knows? Potentially.
But I feel like he would leave that with somebody if he's going to leave his dog Sheba in the car, because that's what boggles my mind. Is like he's a dog lover. He loves his dog. He refers to it as his wife, but then he's leaving it in the car, which makes you think that it could have been like a miraculous like sickness where he just randomly decided to do it. But I like, again, there's so many things that conflict. You start to wonder, what's the actual thing? Was there Sheba in the car? Is that true? Do we have receipts on where she went? But apparently one person, I forgot the lady's name, but I have a clip up about her. She said she picked it up, Sheba, but then later recalls that she didn't do it. She doesn't remember ever stating that. And then later other people stated, oh no, she picked it up. And then it's like, wait, so you have conflicting statements here. You either picked up the dog. That's not something with time your memory would forget. You would remember picking up a dog at a car. You know what I mean? That's a big detail.
Yeah, but the Dallas police investigation, I think they accounted for Sheba being taken to the dog pound. So I'm not sure if that woman picked the dog up from there.
Eventually the dog was at the Carousel Club, because I forgot. I'll have to send you the name of her because I do have a clip up about her. But she talks about, she had Sheba at the Carousel Club after Ruby was arrested.
Right. I mean, it certainly fits, doesn't it? If you want to look as though it was a random act of passion and anger and some kind of act out of grief, and because Ruby would tell anyone that he knew over that weekend how sad he was about Kennedy's murder, and he read a letter that had been written to Caroline Kennedy. He obviously didn't, he used the line only after the shooting though, that he didn't want Jackie Kennedy to have to come to Dallas to testify. That only came out after the shooting. But I think it fits. If you want to make something look, spontaneous, and you would do something like that. You would have the dog in the car knowing that, it would get taken care of. I think it could be explained either way.
I think it's difficult to understand if it was a random act of passion for his love of Kennedy, because there are so many statements from people saying that he did either say this or he doesn't have any political affiliation or never talked about politics around them.
That's right. And I mean, even his whereabouts at the time of the motorcade is pretty interesting.
And that intersects with the shooting as well, too. You have the statement from, I forgot who the reporter's name is, but he said he talked to a guy named Paul from some Associated Press, and that there was a rumor that he had been in an advertising place when Kennedy was shot going through, but the window overlooks the assassination spot. And he said that he was just waiting there on that second floor.
So I think it was the Dallas Times Herald. I think that's where
it's either that or the Morning News.
Yeah, not that far from Main Street, apparently. Not that far. So I think even Seth Cantor states that in his book that, oh no, maybe not him, sorry. It's not beyond possibility that Ruby actually could have watched the motorcade and made it back to be at the Times Herald. And why that's important is because an investigative reporter in the late 70s, Earl Goals, spoke with apparently a former informant, petty criminal by the name of, I forget his name as well, sorry. He said that Ruby called him up and said, hey, do you want to come and watch the fireworks? As if, so it technically could have, because, Ruby wasn't actually seen in the offices of the newspaper until 12:40.
Well, despite all the accounts of a firecracker being the first shot, there were no fireworks in Dealey Plaza on a bright day.
No, there weren't. But I mean, all the Main Street itself, it was obviously there were streamers, and it was a very festive atmosphere. So it might have meant that. Who knows? But Ruby's movements over that weekend are pretty interesting. They say he was at the Texas Theater when Oswald was apprehended. But again, very, very likely that relies on the account of someone that only, again, came out after the fact, after everything that had happened that weekend, and was apparently too afraid to say anything about it, which, given when the mysterious deaths started to happen, probably isn't too, probably isn't too unreasonable to think about.
I think you're in the same area as me when it comes to just the interest of the Ruby or the shooting of Oswald. But how interesting is it for you, the accounts of the reporters? Obviously, there were a lot of people in there, but they're to me, it's fascinating just reading their testimonies, reading their statements, then trying to find out where they were and like what they saw. It's the K box people. I mean, I went down the whole rabbit hole of how Ruby was even in the K box building, based on I forgot what his damn last name is. McKnight is his name. Russ McKnight, I think it is. But he was the late night guy. But he was the one that apparently in Ruby's notebook, one of the addresses in there, but there was only 4 lines to that radio station. 1 was a public line, 2 was with some of the employees, 3 was a private line that only a few people had, and 4 was only for the disc jockeys. And when they asked how Ruby even could call in to the place to, because apparently he was bringing in sandwiches, I do believe he did. I really honestly think that he was trying to figure out what was going on, so he was just using that. But he called through the 4th line, which only the disc jockeys would have, which I believe he got it from McKnight. There was an association there. I think he knew McKnight wasn't going to be there because he knew that his shift only lasted till I think 1 a.m. or something like that, and Ruby came in at like 1:30. So he knew that, hey, I'm here to see McKnight. Oh, well, let you in if you got sandwiches. The guy comes and he goes, sorry, McKnight's not here. He's like, oh, okay, well, do you know what's going? And then he was like asking questions. Like he just started prying out information. I was like, so you weren't looking for McKnight. You were looking to get in there, and then now you're trying to get more information. That's when he goes to the press conference and everything. But how interesting was it for you, the reporters that were involved in there? Like, what's your most reliable witness compared to what's one you just don't believe? Because, dude, I've heard an account of a Negro getting arrested in the basement. And I'm like, where is that? Where's the documentation? I think it's Gene Barnes that stated that, or somebody stated that.
I thought that was out on the street. I could be wrong, because there was, so one of the officers, you remember the car that left the basement to go up the ramp and was apparently, drove past Ruby as he was coming in or approaching. The one of the officers in there, I think it was Putnam, was alerted to a Negro gentleman being chased through the corridors of City Hall. So I know the Barnes account, but then there's that one as well. So was it the same person? What does it mean? I'm not sure. But Barnes, if we want to talk about reporters that were there, he was an interesting guy. He was probably the thing I was most interested in as well about this case was how there were so many reporters there, but where are their accounts? Barnes is one of them. He flew in. He was with NBC Hollywood, and he came in, like most reporters did, from interstate on the afternoon of November the 22nd. He hired a off-duty police officer, Clyde Goodson, I think it was, to basically be Ted Mann, his Soundo's driver for the weekend. He had some pretty interesting stories, after the Oswald shooting. But at the time, he was situated right opposite where the jail office was and the elevator where Oswald was brought down from the 3rd floor on. But he was there to take. I'm not even. I think it was film of Oswald coming out, and then he literally got out of, as soon as he saw that Oswald was coming through the jail office. They turned around and had the idea to get back up to Goodson, who was double parked up on Commerce Street, to escort or somehow follow the convoy to the county jail. Where's his footage? I'm fascinated. All these people that took film and footage that we have never been able to see. The Japanese reporter that we were talking about before, he got photos of Lee Oswald closer than any other photographer, because he was right there. He was right where Ruby emerged from. So many just fascinating instances, and that's what I'm doing a lot of work on at the moment, is highlighting who was where, and not just by guesswork, but going on other, trying to corroborate with other people's testimony. I'll give you one very, very interesting little scenario. I'm not sure. Have you heard of Ike Pappas? He's the guy with the microphone who said, "Have you got anything to say in your defence?" just before Oswald is shot. He's the guy in the short guy with the white trench coat. He's got the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah. So him, Mickey Carroll, and another reporter, Jerry O'Leary. These were all out-of-state reporters. Carroll and Pappas were from New York, and Jerry O'Leary was from Washington.
O'Leary has the longest testimony, I believe, that I've seen. If it's the same one, yeah, he's got about 6 pages, and every other reporter at a max has about 2.
Yeah. So that's because he gave another statement back after he arrived back in Washington, I think. But what I found is that Carroll and O'Leary gave 2 statements to the FBI. I think Carroll did as well. Anyway, what's very interesting is that they positioned themselves up on the 3rd floor at the time, waiting for Oswald to be brought out. And that is where Pappas apparently asked Oswald, "Are you a member of the ACLU?" Now, their story, and they contradict each other. Some don't mention, Carroll's name or this name, but each of their stories basically converge on the fact that they were there to see Oswald go into the elevator with the detectives, so Lavelle, Graves, Montgomery, Fritz, and Swain. And then they were somehow miraculously able to rush down the stairs from the 3rd floor, down to the 2nd floor, down to the 1st floor, down to the basement, and get out of the stairs and beat Oswald in the elevator. Doesn't sound likely, does it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because I had to look at the speed of that elevator, because I've heard some accounts that the elevator was very slow. I just don't know how slow. I mean, I've never been on one where someone could beat me down 3 sets of floors unless they're really trying.
What adds to it though is, if you can say, have you seen the floor plan of the third floor of City Hall? It's got all the rooms. Yeah. So using that, where Oswald was put into the elevator, the stairs and everything that the reporters said that they came down, the stairs would actually, if they went all the way down to the basement, they would actually come out right where Oswald was shot. So it's not a direct route. Didn't you catch what I'm saying? It's flights of stairs, and then they would probably have had to have ran all the way to Harwood Street to then come down another set of stairs to get to basement level, and then be there to somehow meet Oswald as he got out of the elevator.
And push through the crowd of people that are there too.
Yeah, 100%. Add to that the fact that you can only see Mickey Carroll and Morris Carroll and Pappas come out in the pre-shooting footage and get into position. We don't see Jerry O'Leary, even though he said he was at the bottom of the ramp. So why would that be made up? What's the purpose of that story? What does it mean? It's amazing.
How do we not have any interview notes or recording conversations of any of these reporters after the incident? Not like reporting on, not like reporting on it, like, hey, I mean, like, but just talking in their car or just talking in one of their K-Box or radio offices. I haven't been able to find any of those, because I would think that after you be involved in a shooting, whether it's 1 or 3 of you guys that are involved there, you at least, get a burger and shoot the shit in the parking lot about, hey, dude, can you believe that just happened?
I know. It's great though, because O'Leary and Pappas came up with this scenario much after the fact, that they were even practicing running down the stairs to ensure that they would beat the elevator down. So that's fun to think about. But I'll get to after the fact interviews. But one last thing regarding Pappas, he was holding a tape recorder. So tape recorder, microphone. Apparently, that was on the whole time from when he was up on the third floor all the way down his travels, going down, racing down the stairs, right the way up until recording the moment that Ruby was shot. Ruby shot Oswald, and the pandemonium that broke out after that. A miraculous thing happened. He somehow erased all of the recordings of his tape recorder, only up until the point where it says, he's getting it. It's about 10 seconds before Oswald's shot. So that came out when he testified at Ruby's trial in March of '64.
That wouldn't be the only account, because apparently there was a NBC affiliated news network. I'm blanking on its name right now, but they had footage that was investigated by the FBI from the motorcade. And apparently they had taped over it, and that footage was lost. So I was like, damn, whoever took that, you must have more regret than, was it Bob Carroll or something like that? There's a Bob Jackson, the reporter that just missed the shot of the headshot, but then he eventually got the Oswald shot and became famous for it.
You're right. Yeah, it's funny how it works out. But getting back to reporters not being more vocal about what they saw, I think to the one person that stands out for me the most is Tom Pettit. Now he was a news anchor. He was pretty high profile back then, the guy with the glasses.
I haven't been able to make a clip about him because there's not enough I could put into. I mean, there's more than enough that I can put into a minute, but I just don't know how to choose what would be the important stuff.
Yeah. Okay. He was very in the moments after Ruby was shot. He was giving interviews. He was he was weaving around people that were in between him and in his line with the camera. But I cannot find, and maybe someone out there has, I cannot find a peep out of him at any time after that weekend. And that's the case for so many people. No one talked. Some people wrote articles. Even interestingly, Seth Cantor. Now you mentioned him before as Ruby coming up to and being with him at Parkland Hospital. He wrote a couple of books. He went into a fair bit of detail about Ruby because he knew him. He was originally from Dallas. He came up through there before joining the White House press corps and obviously coming back to Dallas that weekend. Cantor wrote a couple of good books, and I have one now called The Ruby Coverup. And even in that, it's a 300-odd page book. It's pretty good. It goes into a fair bit of detail. Do you think with where he was, which was directly in front of Oswald at the time of the shooting, do you think there's any detail in there from him? None whatsoever. There is just an absolute radio silence. And like I said, I can put my hand to my heart saying that there were almost 50, if not 50, members of the media all around, situated all around. And I'm working on a bit of a schematic, a map, showing where all these people, I believe they were, based on statements which are, some are easier to find than others, and the statements of others. But very few people talked, and I think there was a line that was being followed. I think there were a lot of people that were, basically, do not wander out of the narrative, don't talk. Look what happened to Dorothy Kilgallen a little bit later after the fact. But I think there was a scare element to it.
It would suck if we found out that all these people used the same ghostwriter, and the ghostwriter was like, hey, to make your book better and shorter and probably going to be able to fit with the printing pages that we have, we're just going to have to cut out this after account of you at the shooting, because I don't think really people care about that. I'm like, damn, you just lost a whole chunk of history doing that. Thanks. We do have in later years the sixth. I still can't get over they're selling beans in a vending machine or chili in a vending machine. Dude, America's going to shit if we don't have that anymore. That's terrible.
Oh, we don't have it in Australia. I can give you the tip. But there are. What was I saying? There are.
Sorry, bad joke. I shouldn't have done
it. No. There are recordings. There's someone like a local radio guy. Gary DeLorme, he recorded the shooting as well. So we've got video and we've got audio recordings of the shooting. And what's amazing is that all the things that Ruby and Oswald are attributed as either being asked or saying at the moment of the shooting. I don't know if you've heard that Ruby apparently said, "You rat son of a bitch, you shot the president," or
I thought
"son
it
of a
was Jack
bitch," or
Revel saying, "Jack, you son of a bitch." But then Jack Revel stated that he never said anything like that. But then
no,
there's,
yeah,
I
he
think
wasn't
there,
there. He wasn't there. That was
Jim Lavelle. My bad, Jim Lavelle.
yeah, I'm
The
not
guy
even
with the
sure it was
giant
him.
white hat that was attached to Oswald, that's the guy who allegedly said that he never said, "Jack, you son of a bitch." But everyone that I've seen from reports that says that there was "son of a bitch" said by that guy. I haven't heard
Yeah,
the Jack part.
no, it was Combest, Billy Combest, who said Jack. No, actually, sorry, it was Don Ray Archer, who was kind of back where Oswald had just been let out of. Apparently, he heard all the way from back there Ruby saying, "You son of a bitch," and Tom, Detective McMillan, big tall guy in the black fedora who's kind of facing in a weird angle in the Beers photograph. Apparently, he heard the same thing, but those around Oswald, and I'm pretty sure Lavelle, him as well, it didn't say that Ruby said anything. That's why it's strange, because remember you had Pappas recording, and you had, obviously the film footage recording, and this other guy Gary DeLorme just in front where Cantor was, directly in front of Oswald recording, and you don't hear any of that. So why do we have people making up things that people said when Ruby clearly didn't? And even Oswald, apparently Oswald said, "Oh," or he certainly gave out a like a very guttural "oh," but he didn't say any words.
Yeah, people have said he said "oh no" when he got shot or
That's it. I
something like
know.
that.
Yeah,
And it's
didn't do it.
difficult because if Oswald screamed, depending on how sensitive that microphone is, maybe that's that loud enough for it to be picked up, which is I think we all hear Oswald scream like a guttural scream and then fall to the
Mm,
ground. But you don't hear anything before that of any son of a bitch statement. So I mean,
yeah,
unless Jack
that's
Ruby
right.
had just got close enough to be like Jack, you son, or say you son of a bitch or whatever, then
Yeah.
maybe, but I don't know the microphone equipment, the technology, how sensitive it will be. It's loud enough to hear a scream, but again, I wasn't there to be able to tell you Oswald screamed louder than anything you've ever heard
Yep.
before.
100%. Yeah, look, but then when all else fails, you got to think about how many other people were there and perhaps closer, or just as close, didn't testify to that. If it happened, then everyone surely would have said, or much more people would have said, "Yeah, Ruby said, you son of a bitch." He cursed Oswald as he shot him. That would have been part of the headline. That would have been massive. But we've only got these very few, the small amount of people that said Ruby said, you know, something as he shot Oswald, and even then, they're all not saying the same thing. So
What do you believe about
it's
the
funny.
two car honks?
Yeah,
A lot of
that's
conspiracy
that's
people
that's
put weight
interesting.
into that one.
Yeah, look, I don't think there's anything to it, and I'll tell you why. That particular area where the cars were, because what you've got is you've had the two cars, and then further up the ramp was the armoured car that was originally what was going to take Oswald to the county jail. They decided not to go ahead with that because the armoured car could only come straight so far down the ramp. Not because of height or anything. A lot of people say that height wasn't so much of the issue. It was because they were worried that the truck would not be able to start on a slope. It would it had trouble starting that morning apparently, and they didn't want to have to jump start it on a hill on a slope with the prisoner of the century waiting. So anyway, so we had these two cars, and they were surrounded by Dallas police and reporters. And apparently, a lot of these people were out of position. So Doherty, who was part of Fritz's homicide bureau along with Lavelle and Graves, was in the car driving, and he was basically trying to reverse back. But there were people in his way. So I believe that he honked the horn to get them out of the way, and then honked again because people were still. He actually came down fairly close. If you watch the footage, he's still backing in as Ruby has shot after Ruby shot Oswald. the car actually touches Ruby's leg. So that's how close he was getting, and the fact that he was still moving at the time that Oswald was being let out. So I think those honks are actually fairly innocent. Ruby he wouldn't have needed those. He wouldn't have needed those signals. Maybe Fritz might have, but in terms of leading Oswald out, that's what I think. That's what I know some people suspect. But when Fritz comes out, he looks around, he surveys the scene pretty. He takes a good second or so, and arguably he could have seen Ruby in position or gotten some kind of signal. Who knows? But I don't think that's what those car horns were for.
I'm just trying to find the name of the guy on my phone right now because there is a statement. I'm sure you must have come across it. But apparently there was an unidentified officer in the basement. There was a bunch of officers that met on the third floor to speak to whoever, and they were given orders from, I think, his Sergeant something, Lampert or something. But he had ordered them to go down in the basement and search it. All these officers from the guy's account said 10 to 15 went down to the basement, and an unidentified uniformed officer had asked them what they were doing. He said, "We're going to search the basement like we're ordered to." And the guy said, "We already searched it. There's not a need for you to do that." Then they were ordered by Sergeant, I guess it might have been Putnam, to go get every shotgun from the cars. And then they were supposed to go onto some corners of the street for protection for the armored truck and all that. But then they were re-switched around and put somewhere else. And then the shooting happened and all that occurred. So I started wondering, I mean, if you have to think about, I don't believe every Dallas police officer was in on it. I don't think everybody knew. I think you just needed a couple individuals for Ruby. But I believe for Ruby's protection, so he wouldn't have just got shot immediately, I believe that a lot of the guns were removed. And I believe that was purposely intended that way. You would have them in the basement with the guns. But if you look at that, there's not any guns around.
It's a good point you raised, because some people actually testified to police walking around with shotguns before and after the shooting. But we actually had the benefit of some really good footage. Almost half an hour. Maybe more like 20 minutes of a camera down the basement, kind of capturing the scene down there. You don't see any shotguns, and you certainly don't see any after the shooting either. So where that comes into it, I don't know. But shotguns definitely were removed out of parked cars that were a part of the search, which, as I've uncovered as well, was definitely not all it was made out to be. It was the only thing that was searched, or the area that was searched, was the basement car park. So it was obviously a very dark area. There were, the ceiling itself was not covered, so there were exposed pipes and things. There were air conditioning grills. All of those things were searched. Great. But the sub-basement wasn't searched. It certainly wasn't sealed or secured. And it was made out like all of the only Dallas police personnel were in there at the time of the search. But I found at least 3 reporters that observed the search taking place, and even observed the city hall workers being asked to move out. And these reporters, they were allowed to just hang around and take it all in. So that to me tells me that was literally a PR exercise. They were going around. There was 12, I think as many as 14, mostly reserve officers, so unpaid volunteers who paid for their own uniforms, were relied on to carry out the search, and obviously helped Sergeant Dean, who was very, very, very suspicious, very, very suspicious.
I'm going to ask, who do you believe of the Dallas police was involved with Ruby that would have of this idea? Because in my opinion, I don't think it's a giant grand conspiracy. I think if you really look at some of the things with the Dallas police and what they were doing when it came to putting the guilt of the JFK assassination on Oswald, I think it was manipulation of evidence. I think they did a lot of illegal things that if it would have went to a trial, it would have been exposed, and there would have been a really big problem on the heads of some of the high people in the Dallas Police Department. But stating that, I came across an interview that I think was done by Mary Farrell and Jim Mars that was with a carousel girl. Now I'll find it. I have a clip up about it I can send you, but she stated like probably 45 minutes in that interview, the weirdest thing that I have never even thought of, which was that when Jack Ruby was arrested and he was in the jail, a lot of people came to visit him. One of the carousel girls, visited him and
Mm.
stated that when Jack Ruby was getting sick, Bill
Mm.
Decker was caring for him, like really empathetic towards him, at to a
Yeah,
point
okay.
where Jack Ruby was lying on the floor and Bill Decker was rubbing his head. So
W-
I heard that. I
w-
go, what the, what, wait, what?
Yeah,
Like, that doesn't
yeah.
why Bill Decker, you look at photos of the man, you don't ever picture that. But apparently, yeah, Bill Decker in his office had a lot of Jack Ruby's belongings. And he was the one that was contacting every single family member. He was the one
Interesting.
George Senator communicated with because George
Mm.
Senator at the time was very concerned with Jack Ruby's health,
Mm.
especially when he was going up into trial. He was
Mm.
very concerned that, hey, this guy needs help. He needs attention. There's something wrong with him.
Mm.
Bill Decker was right there on the spot, making sure Jack Ruby got whatever he needed. He had his
Yeah,
family
right.
members come down to make sure he could calm Jack Ruby down. But in that interview, I start going, Bill Decker might be a friend, but Bill Decker's also assumed by a lot. And I think the work of Malcolm, or not about Malcolm Blunt, Bart Camp backs this up,
Mm.
which is that Bill
Mm.
Decker has a lot of sketchy things on his profile when it comes to
Yeah,
some of these
yeah,
arrests.
yeah. Ruby actually referred to Decker in a statement that he gave at an appeal. I think it was at the time he was appealing his death sentence, and I think it was March of 1965, and he might have even been to the Warren Commission. But anyway, I know for sure he referred to Decker by saying, he's told me to man up and take be strong in my convictions or something along those lines. So yeah, that tallies with that. But I didn't know about the rest in terms of the care or acting as some kind of advocate for him. Yeah, nothing surprises.
Do you know who you would put on the list of people that you would say is involved with getting Jack
Yep.
Ruby to kill Oswald?
Yeah. So I really, even before I dug deep into the Oswald shooting, I got a lot out of John Armstrong's work in terms of Westbrook and Croy. So Captain William Westbrook was the head of HR, human resources, basically for Dallas Police at the time. We don't have to go too much into their movements on the day of the Kennedy assassination, but they were clearly, as Armstrong puts it, and I think very strongly contends that they were part of the setup of Oswald for the Tippit killing. They may have even come into things a little bit earlier. Apparently, two police officers boarded the bus that Oswald was supposed to have just gotten off of, and Armstrong alleges that it was Westbrook and Croy working together to somehow either track Oswald down, and when that might have failed, set him up for the Tippit shooting. So throw down the wallets and things like that. I believe Westbrook had a part. It's feasible that Westbrook had a part in setting up the Oswald shooting. Very well connected. He had all the dirt on the DPD. Would have known who was friends with who. I think he would have been cunning enough to enlist or know how to enlist someone like Jack Ruby. So I think he might have been the person that might have had the I guess the balls and the nerve to go up to someone like Chief Jesse Curry and say something's going to happen this weekend. Don't you don't it's for the greater good. You don't need to worry about it. None of our boys are going to get hurt, but just know something's going to happen, and it's going to happen in front of the press. Something along those lines. That's my speculation. Because Jesse Curry, he, as you said before, he talked. He was very vocal about. Well, he'd speak to the press, at any time he could. J. Edgar Hoover wanted him to shut up. He issued an instruction for him to stop talking that weekend. But yeah, Curry was I think he was culpable for at best negligent for literally telling the press when Oswald was going to be transferred. It's been painted as he said that Oswald would be transferred if they came at 10 o'clock. They wouldn't have missed Oswald's transfer, but I dug a little bit deeper into that as well, and I have reporters that said that he said 10 o'clock. So yeah, and even on the morning of the shooting, Curry was still saying, "Yeah, we'll be transferring Oswald. We'll be taking him down the elevator. We'll be putting we'll be putting him into an armored car." So he was literally doing his best to tell, to open the door, basically. Whether that makes him a part of the conspiracy with Westbrook, I'm not sure. Fritz, to a degree, I'm not 100% sure on that. At the very least, he was negligent for getting so far ahead of Oswald down in the basement, because he was meant to be, forming that, the front, protecting the front position. But as you can see in footage and photographs, he's at least 6 foot in front of Oswald when he was shot. So that's on Fritz. Harrison, Blackie Harrison, who I think he was a man on the inside. Whether he's in direct communication with Ruby or someone handling Ruby to say, to give an update on movements, or he was the person finding out where Ruby was. I'm not sure, but he was damn close to payphones that whole morning when technically he had no reason to be, and he lied about it. So he's he's in the list as well. Sergeant Patrick Dean, he was the one that even the Warren Commission were most suspicious of.
I think the HSCA included that he let him in through a side door.
Yeah. So what they did was they said that was the most attractive scenario, and that was the frustrating thing about the HSCA on so many fronts. They only went so far. They clearly had their own issues. Blakey obviously came to regret being so influenced by the CIA. He was going on more the mob tangent.
Did you see my interview with him, or a conversation?
No, I heard you did interview him. I haven't seen it.
I had to ask him about that damn safe, because apparently some janitor broke into the safe that had there's an sorry for the tangent, but there's an HSCA safe. One set of codes was with the CIA and the other set were with the HSCA staff. You need both sets of codes to open up the safe. A janitor had opened up the safe and had gone through the autopsy photographs without gloves, and they were all out of order. He also left a diary that was in the safe on a windowsill. When Blakey was pissed about this, he messaged the CIA through an email and said, or a letter, and said, "Hey, we need to talk about this. I don't know what's going on." And they said, let's have a lunch and talk about this and discuss. Of course, we don't have what went on at that lunch, but I asked him, I said, what went on there? And he was just like, yeah, it was a problem. I don't think we ever did get down to the bottom of it or whatever. And I was like, I know he used that to be like, I can use this to my advantage. They're not going to tell me, or they're not going to give me anything on why that happened, but I can use it to request for documents, and they'll think to buy my silence so he'll eventually get some documents. He didn't get as much as he probably thought, but when I talked to him about that, I did address that to him. I mean, obviously it's been years, and he wouldn't have agreed to do the interview if I would have sent that ahead of time for him to try and brush up on. But I asked him about that and the venereal disease stuff with Oswald, how he got it in the line of duty. Just fringe stuff that I think we deserve answers on some things. But yeah, he came to the opinion that he believes the CIA withheld information on him, and his investigation wasn't really a true investigation. And sorry to cut you off, but it was there was so much manipulation with the HSCA that I look back on it. I do think we need to look at that as a reference point compared to the Warren Commission. We don't talk about it enough, and researchers refuse to, because they say the fix was in. Well, they kept the door open for conspiracy. I mean, probably much like your interest in the assassination, the shooting of Oswald is where everyone was like, you're telling me a strip club owner, out of patriotic indignation, shot the killer of the president? That doesn't make any sense. And that really was the conspiracy angle that kept the door open for us to be able to even talk about it, be able to do these things, and not just be like, no, that's a flat earth thing.
Yeah. I think, if you've got to look at it at the time, the conditions, the politics of the time. The Warren Commission was clearly in place. It was a whitewash where everybody, I think, hopefully most people understand that it was there to the outcome was laid out before they even started asking questions. It had to be pinned on Oswald for the sake of national security, to restore faith in the American government, to ensure that Lyndon Johnson would be re-elected, all those things. But there was an instant, and getting back to Dean, where Burt Griffin and more so Burt Griffin, he could sense that this Patrick Dean was bullshitting. on the stand in the Warren Commission. He called him out for it, not necessarily in the during the session, but he approached him during a break and said, "And I've got the memo that he put it in his book recently. Griffin did, what he sent to his superior, J. Lee Rankin, saying, this guy Dean, this is why I might have come across a little bit strong against him." He went up to him and said, "I think what you're saying isn't making sense. And if you're wanting to tell me more, we can help with that. We can, the protection, all these things. What you're saying is not making sense." Anyway, Dean took that as being called out, and he contacted Henry Wade and complained that he of how poorly and disrespectfully he's being treated by the Warren Commission. So Wade called someone in Washington and had Burt Griffin recalled back to Washington, and Burt Griffin, along with Hubert, were heading up the Ruby Oswald shooting aspect for the Warren Commission. They were the ones that were doing all the interviews in Dallas. Griffin wasn't allowed to go back to Dallas for any more of the sessions, but they were. He could sense that Dean was incredibly suspicious. The HSCA picked up on that. You're right. But getting back to Dean and the Warren Commission, apparently after he was disrespected by Griffin, Dean asked to take a lie detector test. Now, lie detector tests now, they don't really have much standing, but back then they did. How accurate they were or not, but Dean was granted a lie detector test. He was able to write his own questions, and he still failed the lie detector test. And the questions were lost. The results were lost. The HSCA went back and looked for them. And Dean himself told whoever the rep was from the HSCA, "Yeah, I took a lie detector test and I failed." And when they tried to, because I don't think they could subpoena him to appear before the HSCA, he just rejected. He didn't appear to answer their questions, but he was always the open-ended question for the HSCA. And if you read their reasons why, it's very, very clear. And I've been able to substantiate that a little bit more. He was the one that had control of the basement. He was the one that indirectly pulled the two reserve officers who were guarding the area, one of which was the one that sent the City Hall workers away. He pulled them away leading up to 11 o'clock and reassigned them to traffic duty, leaving that area where Ruby would ultimately enter through unguarded. He made it his priority after the shooting to get up to see Jack Ruby in the 5th floor, even though he still had responsibility for security of the basement, which was a crime scene. He had to go and see Ruby. So he escorted Forrest Sorrells, the special agent for Secret Service, up to see Jack Ruby. And that's where the first reports of Ruby volunteering how he entered down Main Street ramp emerged. I believe that Dean made that up. He was the one that laid the foundations for premeditation on Ruby's part. So he helped him get in, and then he threw him under the bus after the job was done.
You know the memo by Hoover where he was concerned about the fact that Ruby was able to shoot Oswald? And it was going to be very difficult because there wasn't going to be a trial, which was going to open up the door for conspiracies, and that this wasn't going to be squashed. Obviously, I think Hoover definitely plays a part in the Kennedy assassination, a big part, especially in the cover-up aspect of things. But that memo is interesting to me because obviously there was awareness that wasn't being brought to Hoover's attention that was going on with the FBI, and they might have been reciprocated on orders from initially by Hoover. I mean, I don't think he was lying in that document. I just think there was a lot of things where he started getting mad at the Dallas police. It's where I've done a turnaround on Jesse Curry. I understand Jesse Curry made statements to the press, but he did originally make statements that were lone nutter stuff. He eventually went to conspiracy because he was trying to get in with the FBI. And then Hoover really screwed him over when he found out that he was making statements to the press and doing a bunch of things. I mean, he later wrote a book about the assassination. Obviously, Hoover forced him into retirement, and then later he died. I don't think that's necessarily conspiratorial, but Jesse Curry he's a complicated person in this thing. But I think if you dig deeper into him, there's a lot of things where it's like, okay, you really did at the end try and do a turnaround here, but I think originally he just thought, I mean, what would any of us do in that position? If you were a police chief and you thought you can get a bigger paycheck getting in with the FBI, I mean, a lot of people would take that opportunity, especially how it's $80 for 10 things at the store at Walmart down here. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Give me the pay raise.
Yeah. Curry's an interesting one, I know. The fact that he wasn't able, I think you mentioned it before, he wasn't able to be contacted when the threats allegedly came in against Oswald. That's interesting. The phone line was down. Would he have?
I just think he ignored the phone calls. I bet he was probably tired as shit, and he was probably like, "Fuck this! I don't want to deal with this anymore." He just went to sleep.
But he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have changed things anyway, because he gave his promise to the press, and he said afterwards, this wouldn't have happened if I didn't keep my pledge to the press, and I'm a man of my word, that we would transfer Oswald and you would see it.
He just wanted the attention. He wanted the attention.
He blamed the media for creating the environment that Oswald was ultimately shot in, but he was the one that could have. He could, if those threats were legitimate, it would have been very easy to have swung into action and just put Oswald in a car and got him straight down to county jail. Let me tell you about Ruby's transfer to county jail. That went very smoothly.
Look, he played the part that probably Earl Cabell should have played. As a mayor of your city, you definitely would try and keep the reputation of your Dallas police 100% intact and say that my Dallas police are never corrupt, they're the best, and they do everything they possibly can to keep this city safe and their citizens safe. Jesse Curry was playing that part, and I don't remember if it's him, but he said that there's only a couple members that knew Jack Ruby. But then you look at like the number of people, like Detective Cody's my favorite, who's ice skating with Jack Ruby. And I'm like, yo, this does not match the one in the 50s where he apparently ran the Silver Spur and was beating the shit out of like every other individual.
But he's compare Oswald's transfer to Ruby's transfer. The day after, so Monday the 25th of November, Ruby's transfer happened so smoothly. And you know why? Because Decker and Curry weren't involved. Fritz called it. He called ahead to Jim Lavelle and said, "Let's do it now. I'm in the car. I'm going to drive through. You'll be there with Ruby. We'll put him in the car and we'll drive him straight to the county jail." They made every green light. No press knew about it. There were no grand announcements. Curry didn't know about it. Decker didn't know about it. If only they'd done the same thing with Oswald, eh? But Dean is definitely suspicious. Curry's suspicious. I'm not sure. One person I want to throw at you. Have you seen the footage of when all the police pile on Ruby?
They're covering his face. I'm like, what? God damn it! I'm like, if you're trying to say that it's not Ruby or it is Ruby, you got a tough decision here. Why are you covering his face so much?
Exactly. Yeah. So you've seen Lewis Miller. That's the guy that covered Ruby with a sack. Lewis Miller was the guy that went to the coffee shop, the diner with Blackie Harrison. So could he have been in on it as some kind of right? When it happens, we need you to cover up the Oswald shooter. He might not have known that it was going to be Jack Ruby. You know what? Maybe even Sergeant Dean didn't know that it would be Jack Ruby that he would be unlocking the door for. Because if you watch footage of Dean kind of just after the ambulance has taken Oswald away, he's looking pretty rattled. I mean, he says to the police, "I know who it is. I'm not telling you," but he's looking pretty cagey. He's looking like he's he's spinning out a bit. He's processing a lot. So Dean could have set the scene and being part of the plot in that regard, but he might not have known that it was Ruby.
It's Isidore Blackman, right? Blackman.
Is he Blackman?
Yeah, you mentioned him before.
No, he was a cameraman. So he got into position right at the last second, and he was under where Bob Jackson took the photo of Oswald being shot. And he's kind
Because
of taking footage,
I got a
kind of from an upper angle.
I got a few clips. I think you mentioned I have Frank Johnston. I don't know if that's the same one you mentioned. You mentioned Fred Johnston.
No, Frank Johnston. He took the photograph of when people alleged that Oswald was looking at Ruby.
I
That's a
have
front.
there's a clip at Parkland Hospital, and I think it might be from Gene Barnes where he hired the driver. The driver knew who the shooter was. And when Gene Barnes went to Parkland Hospital, the driver said, "You want to know who shot um, Oswald?" Yeah, and then he was like, "Yeah, but you're gonna have to. It's gonna cost you." So then Gene Barnes gets on the phone or whatever, and then calls his people, and then eventually the guy just shouts in the room, "It was Jack Ruby." I'm like, "How did you know that before they did? They got their information from the camera technicians that found out like whatever in a matter of like 3 minutes before that phone call was even placed. So you had inside information. Whether he got it from Patrick Dean, I don't know, but I was wondering if you came across that because I thought that was a
Yeah,
very
I have.
interesting
Yeah,
statement.
yeah, it is. Or maybe that's just a good old fashioned case of DPD bullshit. Who knows? In terms of I know you did it, and it wouldn't have taken much for word to have gotten out of DPD ranks. Apparently a lot of the police, recognised it to be Ruby, recognised him to be Ruby straight away, and apparently Ruby himself, when he was being subdued back in the jail office, you all know me, I'm Jack Ruby. It was kind of like he was surprised at the attention he was got. Because I think getting back to his motives, I thought he thought it would be a case of shooting Oswald and being taken away, but not being pounced on by my count 12 DPD officers and having his head covered.
I
Mm.
it's yeah, it's definitely I'm so happy that you studied the Ruby shooting because this is one area that I was just like looking at all these reporters. I was like, I hope someone is fresh on these accounts with me on this because there's a lot of them there. But to mention what Gary Aguilar said to me, it's very good advice. You're not going to remember everything. Obviously, when it comes to things, people can nitpick names, even if stuff slips your mind. It's the matter of being able to, when you're in it and you're understanding it and you're researching it, able to speak about it and be able to put it out there so people can listen to it, hear it, and then look it up and find it. I think I wouldn't necessarily consider myself much of a researcher, just trying my best to make sure people can get on the same page as a lot of people have been doing great work on. You've done excellent work. I'll have you back on here to talk about Garrison because that like I said, that's a giant area for me that I've just neglected because I believe you don't need it for the conspiracy stuff. It helps for sure, definitely. But when you're trying to get the public in on the discussion that the Warren Commission was wrong and what we know now in 2024 is 1,000 times different, you don't need them that much. But I want to give you a second to be able to promote your links, and we'll have to schedule another conversation to talk about
Yeah,
Garrison.
sure. Well, I'm just at the moment. I'm just doing all the work. I'm putting together a book on the shooting of Oswald. So a few working titles on that, but I'm putting some final the edits to get bringing all the references together. But that's something I hope to have out pretty soon because the way I guess I researched this the Oswald shooting was I didn't have any predetermined conclusions of saying, right, I want to prove that it wasn't Jack Ruby, or I didn't set out like that. I literally started with the Dallas police investigation. I collated all testimonies on that, and then I moved to the FBI and the Warren Commission because the FBI swung in pretty much almost instantly with their investigation. And the next thing I noticed was all the contradictions between what people told the Dallas Police Department and what people told the FBI. That kind of piqued my interest a little bit more. So I'm gathering all these testimonies, and I finally got to a point where I lined up basically with what the HSCA, the four alleged scenarios that they put forth of how Ruby could have gotten in the basement. I never knew that about the HSA. I didn't delve into it. I got there by following the evidence. And what I'm putting together is hopefully something that it's not going to have all the answers. It's going to introduce people the conditions, the way that the shooting came about, all these funny different little mysterious aspects. The Gene Barnes episode. My Harrison down in the locker room on the phones. The three reporters racing an elevator. All of it. I'm putting it together so it's not a smack you in the face. Predetermined. I'm leading you to one conclusion. I want to get people thinking about this, like you. That's exactly the way I've set out. My book is drawing people in, and hopefully this will become its own topic of research, because it's bloody interesting. It's so interesting. There is so much to it, and you know what? It can give us some really, really good touch points to the Kennedy assassination. They were linked. I'm absolutely sure of it. And if we can uncover some things to do with Oswald's shooting, as these things go, what threads might we uncover that maybe had just been, laid obscured ever since, because, it was to do with the Oswald shooting, and it was always seen as an open and shut case. I'm bringing it out, and hopefully it's going to, just get people doing their own research into this.
Two titles I have for you that are works in progress. I just thought of them a minute ago. I'm going to shoot them at you. Feel free to say that they suck. I was thinking Censored, Exposed, Silenced, the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. And then the second one that I like a little bit more is Stripped Down and Strapped Up. Because it's a reference on like the carousel shit, but it's also that Oswald was basically, they were holding his arms and everything. He was lined up like a pig to slaughter. So they're working titles I just thought of in the past 2 minutes. But
thanks, man.
No, man, I really do appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show about this. I'm very appreciative of the work that you've been able to do when it comes to the JFK topic. Obviously, it's a massive case here, and I know people have been researching it for 60 years, but there's a lot of areas that it seems like we have lost touch with at times. I think the shooting is an example. I think everyone knows, like, oh, Jack Ruby shot Oswald. That's how you know there's a conspiracy. Okay, well, let's get into the details of like the reporters who was there, just for historical record purposes. You start to uncover a lot more.
We you know what, we owe. I'm going to say it, we owe Oswald that much. We owe Ruby that much. We owe Tippett. We owe Kennedy, and all the people that died because of that weekend, or as a result of. It was a monumental moment in history, and I can say that as an Australian, massive, and it should never be forgotten. So anything that we can do to keep it in the, in the ether out there, awesome podcasts like yourself, conversations that you have, we've got to keep doing it, because history, it doesn't necessarily repeat, but it rhymes. And there was almost another assassination a couple of months ago in the United States, and it's what might the fallout have been from that. It's we should never forget.
Do you have any social medias or anything you'd like to promote out there?
No, I will bring out. I'm just planning either maybe a website or some kind of Substack. When I bring out my books, I'll have people have access to the films and the photographs that I refer to. Interesting bits of evidence that I've uncovered that might have been a little bit obscured. Things like that. I will. So I definitely have to come back on and give you a bit of an update for sure, Robbie. Yeah.
And I can make sure I can go back and put it in those links for people to be able to click on. But I appreciate you for giving me the time, and thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.